Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, as the protests in Iran continue, Iranian women living in exile are closely watching events unfold with horror as the government enforces a harsh crackdown. Also, the French government is proposing new laws on dealing with incest as figures reveal that some 160,000 French children are victims of incest every year. I'll be talking to noted Franco-American author and journalist Brey, whose latest book tackles the issue. And Brussels' famed comic strip Walk and its murals are accused of sexism, forcing city officials to take unique steps to address the claims. But first, and it's just over a month since the death of Mahsa Amini in custody after being arrested by the Iranian morality police for allegedly violating the country's strict dress code for women. Her death triggering the biggest protests seen in Iran for years. Recently, an Iranian climber also caused a sensation after she competed abroad without wearing a headscarf. She received a hero's welcome upon her return to Tehran from South Korea. In the meantime, Iranian women in exile have been following these protests closely, anxious to see what it will mean for the country that they are unable to live freely in. Emerald Maxwell has more.
Istanbul has proven a relative safe haven for this Iranian dancer.
At least it's not illegal to dance in Turkey. I put on shows here. People look me in the face as I dance and smile.
In 2015, Mikhail Alizadeh fled Iran, where the state considers a woman dancing an indecent act.
A neighbour of mine reported me to the police. I would have had to stop dancing if I had continued to live in Iran or spend the rest of my life in prison. I can't live without dancing.
Alizadeh has been supporting Iran's women-led anti-government protests as much as she can from exile. She's feeling hopeful about the movement, one of the boldest challenges to Iran's clerical rulers since the 1979 revolution.
We are going to win this time. This government is cruel. This government is a killer. Cruelty is not sustainable. It's over for this government.
Her optimism, though, isn't shared by Sadaf Hardem, a fellow Iranian in exile.
I don't agree with the strategy of the protesters because the government is very, very strong. They arrest people, they kill people, and I'm afraid for people's lives. I hope that it all works out, but I'm not very optimistic.
Hardem was hoping to lead the way for Iranian female boxers when she competed in an official match 3 years ago in France. But she cancelled her return home after an arrest warrant was issued against her. She sympathises with climber Elnaz Rakabi, who, after competing without a headscarf while abroad, issued what appeared to be a forced apology. Hardem says Iranian female athletes have to live with an extra weight on their shoulders.
I remember my first fight. I wasn't even thinking about the fight. All that I was afraid of was coming home. What's waiting for me? What's going to happen to me?
After staying silent for years out of fear for her family in Iran, Hardem says she now believes it's her duty to speak out, in solidarity with the women risking everything in the Islamic Republic.
Now, in the wake of a shocking report on the prevalence of incest in French families, the government has proposed changes to the laws on sexual crimes against children. Among the recommended proposals, parental authority would be withdrawn from those convicted of incestuous acts. An estimated 160,000 French children are victims of incest every year. Brey is a Franco-American writer, journalist and TV host. Her writing focusing on gender, with her latest book about the epidemic of incest in this country has just been published in French, appropriately enough entitled The Culture of Incest. Iris, thank you so much for joining us today. When you look at that figure of 160,000 children a year being reported as victims of incest, that itself is an extraordinary figure. But is this a particularly French cultural problem, or would you find similar figures in other countries?
I don't have the exact figures of other countries, but I'm pretty sure it would be the same everywhere. It's 1 out of 10 children in France. And why I say I think it would be prevalent in every Western country is because what we found with our book and writing about this book is that incest is basically, it's the basis of patriarchy. So if you're living in a patriarchal society, there is going to be prevalence of incest everywhere. And so 1 out of 10 children means every family is basically concerned. So, and I think that's what we have to think about is why are we only thinking about incest, and this book, Culture of Incest now, and why are those figures so shocking when we actually, most of us know already that incest is everywhere.
Iris, often when children say that they've been sexually assaulted, they're accused of an overproductive imagination. Is sex education for children, therefore, the answer?
Of course, that's a huge thing. And that in itself is very taboo to talk about that. Because what we see when we look at incest is that children actually do speak, but the adults can't hear or don't want to listen. So it's really a two-way situation. The children are able to articulate that something is wrong, but don't have the words to express what is actually happening. So giving the children the vocabulary, the words, is a way of progressing. But then if the adults aren't able to listen for a reason or another, then the children can't go through the process of speaking. And it's very similar with what we were saying when Me Too arrived, right? It's the victims have spoken. Are we ready to listen to them? It's the same thing with children. And that's why I also chose this title with the co-authors of, La culture de l'inceste, incest culture, because if we don't have the words, we can't think about it.
Do these proposed changes that the government is putting forward, do they go far enough?
For me, it's not the government who has to find solutions. For me, the solution is to think collectively as a society, what is family? These abuses, the reproduction of evil is happening within our families. So we have to think collectively, what is family? How are we protecting our children? What is this idea of protection coming from? And why are we failing massively to protect our children? And I think we need to think about it as a larger problem.
I'm curious to ask, given your extensive writing on gender here in France, if this country lags behind other cultures in addressing these problems, and is that due to its Catholic history or its Latin culture, or both?
For me, the problem is more linked to education in our universities and what is seen as being important in the way of thinking about the world. And I think that I had the chance to study in the States, and I think that's why I'm able to write about gender in France. But what's interesting, though, in this cultural French exception is that Me Too in the United States was about an adult man. And what we had for Me Too in France was Adèle Haenel talking about a filmmaker and something that happened as a child. Same with Camille Kouchner, right? So the stories that we have, our Me Too stories, are always linked to childhood. And it's not the case in the States. And I do not know why that is. But I think that's why this book about incest, I'm writing it in French and not in English. And maybe I'll have an answer to that in a couple of years.
Iris Brey, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, finally, an essential part of any visit to Brussels is its famed comic strip route and the dozens of murals painted on the walls of the city. Adored by tourists and locals alike, the walk has become, however, controversial because some of the images are considered to be sexist. Our team on the ground sent us this report.
Hidden at the end of a dark alley, drowned in the cityscape, or clearly visible in the heart of a busy street, in Brussels, the 40 murals of the comic strip route have been attracting attention for more than 30 years. But more recently, they've also garnered the wrath of feminist associations. Pauline wanted to take us to this painting.
Two police officers are looking at a naked woman and a racialized man.
Her collective is demanding that some of these murals be removed from the comic strip route.
We're in a neighbourhood where there are lots of different schools. Is that what we want to convey? The objectification of women, racial profiling?
However, the city administration doesn't want to erase this heritage. The mayor's team preferred to opt for these QR codes, which give an explanation in historical context.
In the colonial context of the time, the beast appeared as a metaphor for the necessarily wild African woman. We think it's better to explain that than take away our hide, to let people make up their own minds about what's acceptable and what's not.
That's an opinion shared by these two academics who participated in drafting these background notes. Here, this historian wanted to recall who Josephine Baker really was.
She wasn't just a music hall dancer who appeared topless in 1925. She was a member of the resistance during the war. She also joined the Air Force.
You have to be able to restore both the context of creation and at the same time try to find a balance so as not to fall prey to what is sometimes the fault of certain militant approaches or to fall prey to stereotypes about the medium itself.
Another problem is the lack of representation of female comic authors on this route. Elodie Chanta is one of these new authors who seek to convey other messages through their drawings.
Now, stories that are told by the new generation, let's say, are less problematic and with characters that are less caricatured.
A different approach from the older images that depict stereotypical heroes and heroines.
And that's all for now. You can keep up with the 51% on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. Plus, you can catch our previous programs on the France 24 website. So until our next show, bye for now.